Evening, bonsoir à tout le monde. Soyez le bienvenu. Très contente de voir tant de monde ici ce soir. It's a great pleasure for Genome Canada as well to be a sponsor of this event. The third conference looking at public policy and science, a really important topic. So we have a fantastic panel, as you see from your book, and we'll be coming to them shortly. Me fait particulièrement plaisir que nous soyons réunis ici à Ottawa afin d'explorer avec tant d'experts les questions de politique publique et de science. And I have to say, there's probably never been a more appropriate time for scientists to talk to politicians or for politicians to talk to scientists. We're living in a world where in developed nations, I think the research budgets that have been allocated by our governments have never been so high. And with that comes an accountability from the scientific community to talk about relevance of what they do to society. So science provides the driver for prosperity for Canada. Policymakers shape the science programs and practices so that all Canadians can share in prosperity. Canada is obviously a pioneer and recognized as such worldwide in telecommunications, in space technology, in many areas of medicine, in agriculture. I can't help, of course, not mentioning genomics as one of those areas of research that has true leadership in the Canadian scene and recognized as such internationally. And we have a special model in which we deliver that genomics program for Canada with Genome Canada and the 6 regional genome centers that have been created and have been operating for the last 10 years and delivering a $2 billion program in this really exciting technology. So the successful scientific endeavor is possible in Canada and around the world because of strong policy and strong support from governments. And science, as many have pointed out already, is changing and will continue to change the way we live. It ignites innovation and inspires change. And the discovery, the rate of discovery in science is such that it's never been so rapid. So we're going through rapid discovery. And we need to make those discoveries relevant to society, as I was saying. That means translating them to use as efficiently as we can. And we've seen already in this conference that Canada lags behind in some of those areas of translation, whether that be a commercialization or other initiatives to turn discoveries into use. So our panelists tonight, as you will see, are perfect translators because they are both scientists and politicians. And we need people who understand both worlds to translate our thoughts, the scientific thoughts coming from the scientific community, and also thoughts coming from the policy makers. And so this is a fascinating interface for us to discuss this evening. So without further ado, I am going to pass the podium over to our moderator for this evening, Gloria Galloway, parliamentary journalist, who has kindly agreed to moderate this session tonight. Thank you very much.
And maybe this is the time when we should bring our panel up here as well. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves to you in a second. No, there's no certain order. Just you pick a spot.
Arm wrestling.
First of all, you all have me at a huge disadvantage because you've been spending your day listening to people talk about the very topic that we're here to address tonight. And I've been spending most of my day listening to politicians. So, and then I'm going to listen to them again tonight. But that's good because it's what I do. I am not a science reporter, but it is impossible for any reporter today who writes pretty much about anything not to bring science into the things they write about. If I write about the health, or if I write about the environment, or if I write about natural resources, fisheries, you name it, transport, science ends up being part of what I write about. And that's important. It's important because Canadians know more about science today than they ever did before. I remember back in the day when I was a little kid and the Scientific American would thud through our mailbox once a month, and that was about the only avenue that inquiring minds had to learn about new scientific discoveries. Now I can listen to science programs, which I actually do on my iPod as I walk into work, or if I want to see pictures of Mars, or learn about deforestation, or what's happening under the sea in the Arctic, I can easily go to the web. And that means that it's important that politicians pay attention to science, and that what science has to say does, or at least should, play an important part in public policy. And of course it goes the other way too. It means that when politicians are putting huge amounts of money, as they are now, into science, that scientists owe it to Canadians to give them some value for what they're doing. So that's what we're here tonight to discuss. We're going to try to discuss it in a nonpartisan way. We're going to try to discuss it we're going to try to look at how to bridge that gap. And again, I know this is something that you've all been giving a lot of thought to today. I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves. I guess I'll start at this side and then go down for a little bit, and then we will be asking questions, and then we will throw it open to questions from the floor too, because I'm sure you all have things to ask these folks yourselves. So starting at this end, we'll start with Mr. Moridi.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening, and I would like to express my sincere thanks to the organizers of the conference for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's also a great honor to be a member of this panel with my fellow scientists, politicians from both federal and, I guess I'm the only provincial politician here, am I? Yes. I'm the only provincial. So it's a great pleasure to be with my federal counterparts here who happen to be scientists and politicians. We are rare species in politics, being scientists and politician. As you can see, there are only, I guess, 4 or 5 of us in the whole this country, at least in the Toronto. Yes, and we are more friends. So we are not going to talk about party politics tonight, just science policy or science politics. My name is Reza Moridi. I am a member of provincial parliament. I represent the riding of Richmond Hill. If you don't know Richmond Hill where it is, it's just north of Toronto. Some of my friends call Richmond Hill as North Pole, those who live downtown Toronto, but it's about 25 kilometers from Queen's Park. So I represent the riding of Richmond Hill at the Ontario Legislature. Apart from that, I just recently appointed as parliamentary assistant to the Ministry of Energy. I got elected in 2007 from the same riding, and in the previous parliament, I served 2 years as parliamentary assistant to Ministry of Training Colleges, Universities, and 2 years as parliamentary assistant to the Ministry of Research and Innovation. And at that ministry, I had the pleasure and the honor of working with Professor Camille Gabriel, who is sitting here as Assistant Deputy Minister of that ministry. After the election, I was in 2011, just almost a month and a half ago, I was re-elected, and now, as I said, I am the parliamentary assistant to the Ministry of Energy. I'm a physicist. Before entering into politics, I worked for 17 years at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. Part of those years, I served as vice president and chief scientist of the institute. I got to know the nuclear industry of Canada very well, and I can see Fred Boyd is sitting there from the Canadian Nuclear Society magazine or monthly journal. And prior to that, I served as executive in electrical industries for some years, and also an academic professor, chair of physics department, and dean of sciences, and a member of university senates, etc. So I have quite a broad experience both in academia, research, and the business and the industry, manufacturing industry, electrical industry. So I bring those experience, a wide range of experience from business to research, industry, trade, and all of that to politics. In 2003, actually, I was asked by the Ontario Liberal Party to enter into politics. At that time, I resisted. I said I'm a scientist, and I'll keep working in the area of science, and basically my interest in politics will be on the side. But in 2006, I thought it's a time to enter formally into politics, and I did, and I was fortunate that I got the nomination of the party and also elected. The reason I entered into politics was that, first of all, I had passion for politics since I was a young boy. So politics is not a job. It's basically you respond to a call. If you don't have a passion for politics, this doesn't suit you. So I had a passion for politics since I was a young boy. I guess that was one of the main reasons that I decided to enter into politics. But then the other reason was that I thought that, you know, particularly in my field, in the nuclear industry, we scientists, we were talking to each other, and we were not talking to the community, to the society. And that was, I thought, one of the reasons that the nuclear industry was losing the ground in this country. So anyway, that was one of the reasons that I thought we need more scientists in politics, and I thought it's the right time to enter into this arena, and I did.
Thank you very much. Dr. Leach.
Thank you. My name is Kelly Leach. I'm the Member of Parliament for Simcoe Grey. I'm a retired pediatric orthopedic surgeon, albeit that I do look like I should be in the pediatrics population myself some days. I spent most of my time prior to this experience in a room with two people. So if I talk too quickly or chat, you know, sort of seem a little nervous, it's because they were both asleep, both the patient and the anesthetist. So bear with me. But as I said, I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon from the Hospital for Sick Children. I'm the former chair of the Richard Ivey School of Business, Health, Innovation, and Leadership Center, and a former chair-in-chief of pediatric surgery. I think that I've been invited here because I'm the health component of this panel, albeit that all will be revealed. I think, I don't know if others are MDs. I think I'm in the illustrious PhD category, which I would never be able to acquire because I was not willing to put that amount of time and effort into servitude at a lab. But that being said, I think the other component part of it is I spent a fair amount of my time when I was at the Richard Ivey School of Business and also at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Western Ontario, recruiting students to be interested in policy and being involved in public debate and how they could bring forward their ideas, whether they be science ideas or public policy ideas, to have a broader impact on Canadian families. So I hope that there are a number of students here today. I hope they're interested in entering into the field of not only looking at developing their research skills when it comes to the basic sciences, but also those in public policy and the development of them. For me, I entered into politics because I was asked this year to run and was fortunate enough to be elected on May the 2nd, but primarily because I was involved in 2006 in the development of the Children's Fitness Tax Credit, a tax credit that impacts 1.5 million children. I'll never see that many in my clinic. So a way of public policy being a way to truly impact families in a much broader way. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mr. Garneau.
Thank you very much. My name's Mark Garneau. I'm the Member of Parliament for Westmount Ville-Marie, and I'm a bit disguised tonight, but it's only temporary.
We hope so.
So do I. Thank you. And d'abord, j'aimerais féliciter les organisateurs de cette conférence. C'est la deuxième année que je participe. J'ai participé l'an dernier à Montréal. J'ai beaucoup aimé la participation. Alors, je suis très, très content de revenir pour une deuxième fois. My background, I'm an engineer. And I did undergraduate engineering in engineering physics, and I did a PhD in electrical engineering. To call myself a scientist would be a bit of a stretch. I did obviously have to do some research while I was doing my PhD. And I have sort of brushed up against scientists my entire professional life, particularly when I was with the space program, because a very important component of the Canadian space program, and during the time that I was down south with NASA, had to do with science. And so during the time, for example, that I did my space flights, I performed a number of experiments, and obviously on behalf of scientists back on Earth, and obviously I had to understand what I was doing, so I worked quite a bit with scientists. And when I was president of the Canadian Space Agency, the scientific community here in Canada being a major stakeholder, I was often in universities and working with scientists across the country. So I've been involved with scientists, and I believe as a result of that have learned about what a scientist is, what research goes on, not only in our universities and colleges, but also in our government labs, and to some extent as well in the private sector. So that's the kind of background that I bring. Why am I in politics? I've always enjoyed politics, not only the policy side of it, but also the characters that are involved in politics. So I've always sort of followed it as an adult. Secondly, I do believe that there are advantages to having more scientists / engineers and other professions as well in the House of Commons because as this conference says it, we're talking about policy here, and to formulate good policy, it is important to have obviously expert advice given to us as parliamentarians, but sometimes it's also important to have people within the House of Commons who understand what science is about, and I thought I can make a contribution from that point of view. There are not a lot of scientists, as you know, in the House of Commons. I was also, for other personal reasons, drawn to politics. One is having seen the Earth from space. I have a very strong concern about what we as a species are doing to our planet, so an environmental concern, and so wanted to participate in that debate on a national level. And finally, I'm in politics also because I believe that there's a great deal of cynicism about politicians, and some of it is well-founded, and that I wanted to go into politics to at least be able to show some people that it is an honorable profession. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madame LeBlanc.
Good evening, everyone. It is also a great pleasure for me to be here with you. My name is Hélène Leblanc. I am the MP for La Salle-et-Mar and also the official opposition critique in science and technology. First of all, I must say that I am a teacher. I graduated in 1983, and I think the profession of teaching and communicating never left me. Afterwards, I was lucky enough to become an educator in the Museum of Agriculture and Museum of Science and Technology. As an educator and a communicator, I had the chance of communicating my enthusiasm for those two fields of science, agriculture and science and technology. I decided to return back to study, and I graduated from McGill with a Bachelor of Science of Agriculture and Environment, specializing in animal science. And the reason why I went back to school, it was also a concern for the state of agriculture and the state of the environment, and to study the scientific component of those in life science was very enlightening for me and very beneficial. I decided I was always also interested in politics, talking a lot about politics, observing the situation. And after a while, I decided to put my word into action and decided to run in 2009 in the municipal election in Montreal. I was not elected, but afterwards I got the chance again to run in 2011, and I was also elected on May 2nd. The three ideas, while preparing for this conference, the three ideas that came in my, to try to summarize the three ideas that I wanted to share with you, was the importance of science and innovation in our economy and also in our quality of life. And also that as politicians, we need to have informed, to be able to make informed decision. We need to have strong data, strong information, data that comes from the scientific fields, science. And also that in order to get informed, we need to get source of information from all sides, because a lot of the issues we have to deal right now are multifaceted. That is why I think it's important to have an open door and a dialogue between the scientific community and also the politician community.
Thank you. So let's start with what we're really here to discuss. The barriers that are sometimes exist, maybe always exist, between the two different spheres, the scientific sphere and the political sphere. If you are going to tell Canadians what those barriers are, or more importantly, why those barriers should be dropped, what would you say to them? Let's start with Mr. Garneau.
Thank you. Obviously, the scientists who are working in this country want to communicate to the government why it is that the science they are doing is important, primarily because they need funding from the government. And they want the government to endorse, legitimize, if you like, the science that they are doing. From the political perspective, what we are seeking is input. And so, so that we can make some very fundamental decisions. How much do we want to put of the taxpayers' money into funding science? Where do we want to put that money? All the different programs that are available. Thirdly, what are our views on what kinds of science we want to fund if we are going to prioritize? You've all heard the debates about basic or fundamental science versus applied or perhaps more commercially driven. These are things that governments, depending on their values and their focus and their vision, will take different approaches to. But one way or the other, we need that input. And that input, I would suggest to you, has to come from the research scientists in our universities and colleges, in government as well, because as you know, there are a lot of government labs and there may be government scientists, and also because there is some research that is done in our private sector. We also need to hear the kinds of things that they want to tell us about how we, in terms of federal policy, can help them to perform their science. So we need that strong communication. I would suggest to you that that can best be done by the creation of committees that report to Parliament, that speak to Parliament, either to tell them their concerns, that perhaps are responding to questions that have been asked by government and they're seeking input, but that strong linkage needs to exist between the scientists out there and the government, which is looking for that information. And I think only by having that input and that strong communication, and there are a lot of organizations that are here in Ottawa that do come and report to committees and tell us things, but I think that there is definitely room for other committees and groups that directly represent the research scientists themselves that we would benefit from hearing from as politicians.
Mr. Moridi, it's the federal government that puts the bulk of the public money into science. Is it any different, though, at the provincial level? Is there even a broader gap, would you say, between the scientists and the politicians at the provincial level than there is at the federal level?
Well, I think I think there is a gap. Yes, there is a kind of barrier between science and the politicians, both at the federal and the provincial levels in this country. We could see that quite vividly, and the reason may be that our politicians mostly they come from social sciences background, legal background, and that kind of background. So it's not very easy for them to understand the value of science and the contribution of science to our economy. So we could see these barriers, and we could see the lack of appropriate attention to the importance of science in our economy. And when we look, we compare Canada within about developing countries, we see that well-developed countries, we see that our spending in science and development is, I think, we rank 14. There has been some work in the past done, but still, I think we need to work very hard to break those barriers, to bring down those barriers, and invest heavily in science and also engineering, both in the area of basic research, fundamental science, and also applied science, and also in terms of commercialization of research. In the past century, when you look at the history of science, you will see that most of discoveries in science has been done by accident, as they call them, discoveries. I can give you some examples. For example, the discovery of electron, discovery of X-ray, and a number of other discoveries they've done by accident. Scientists were doing something, and in between they found a small tiny particle called electron, and so on and so forth. And we see that these discoveries have changed the face of the world today. But these days, starting from maybe the discovery of, or the so-called discovery of transistor in 1948 at Bell Labs in the United States, that discovery was a planned discovery. Basically, the scientists, they sat down and they said, we have to find something, we have to build something to replace the vacuum bulb. And they did. Within a couple of years, they built it, the transistor. And since then, we see that discoveries in science and technology and engineering, all of that, comes based on investments, on planning, and so on and so forth. So for doing that, the government's role is very important. How governments, or in this country, our federal government, the provincial governments, how do we fund the research? How far, as a politician, do we understand the importance and significance of research and science in our economic development? Of course, the results is not going to be seen in a matter of a day or a year or 2 years. These are very long-term investments. And sometimes we politicians, because we are there for 4 years, 5 years, and we also want to be re-elected, so the voter attention is always in our mind. But we have to go far beyond our term. We have to think through this very carefully in a long term. Maybe the thinking and the planning should be 20 years, 30 years down the road, and then we can get to where other Western industrialist countries are. We are far behind our competitors in the area of science and research and development.
Dr. Leach, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit here, because I know that you haven't been a politician through a federal budget yet, and I also know you're not the finance minister. But what kinds of things do you...
I'm taller.
So am I. What kinds of things do you think that your particular government is going to be looking at? I mean, you've got all these kinds of things you could be funding in terms of science. What kinds of, and I'm not going to ask you what you're going to fund, but what kinds of qualities in the science do you think that the government, knowing a little bit from the inside as you do, is going to be looking for when it tries to decide what deserves funding?
Well, I think the primary thing that our government has been focused on since the election in May, has been about growing the economy. And the people that are in this room, those of you that are scientists, those of you that are involved in public policy, can play a huge role in helping grow that economy. Your ideas and making sure that they're communicated to us, similar to what Dr. Garneau was saying, and making sure that you have the tools to promote those and move those forward so that we do have high-paying jobs here in Canada, and that we have an opportunity to make sure that we're driving the economy through new innovations and new research ideas, is key to making our country work and be successful. So our focus is on people and their ideas, making sure that they have the tools to be able to be successful in getting that next great idea into the marketplace. And for myself, I'm very encouraged by this. I came from the Richard Ivey School of Business, but from the health, innovation, and leadership side, where we train students to do exactly that. Take their great idea and provide them the tools so that they could build that next company that put their widget into the market and impacted families and people across the country. So I'm very encouraged with our government's direction. The intent is investment in people, whether that be the Vanier scholarships, the Banting scholarships. I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with them, or the chairs for the Centers of Excellence, and in their ideas so that we can grow the economy.
Thank you. Madame LeBlanc, when you're sitting around with your colleagues and when you're thinking about the things you're going to oppose, you're a member of the opposition, does anybody ever say, hey, that is good science, or that is bad science, or yes, we should be doing this because it makes scientific sense, or no, we shouldn't be doing this because it doesn't make scientific sense? Does the research ever come into play when public policy is determined even by the opposition?
I'm not that, I wouldn't feel comfortable at saying a good science or bad science. What I would like to, because I don't think it's, I am not in a position where I would judge that. What I would like to say is that right now I am in the process, the learning process, and I think that's what the science is curiosity, getting to know, to have informed decision. So right now I am meeting a lot of people, getting to know more about their fields, and then being kind of a translator for my colleague, and then evaluate. But I don't think I would be able to make that type of decision before talking to a lot of different people in the scientific field and getting a very good idea. So I think that I am still in the first step of that knowledge process.
Fair enough. I've put you a little bit on the spot there.
No, that's okay. We're here for that.
You know, there are lots of lobby groups, as I'm sure each one of you knows, that's coming to your doors every day and saying, we need more money for this, we need money for that. We write about all the time. Are the scientists a lobby group? I mean, how often do you get scientists knocking on your door saying we need this? And I'm asking this because, you know, my sisters are scientists, and whenever I talk to them about anything that happens outside their lab, like politics, they always look a little confused. I'm wondering whether the scientists are taking advantage of the politics, the way, say, maybe the veterans do, or the fishers do, or the environmentalists do. Do scientists lobby politicians? And I'll put that question to, I guess, Mr. Garneau has not had a question later.
Thank you very much. No, not enough. I was the industry, science, and technology critic up until the last election for my party, and I received a huge number of lobbyists in my office, a lot of them, and very few of them were representing scientists per se. There may have been scientists amongst the people coming, but there was really no strong presence that was almost exclusively scientific, with a focus on what it is that's important for scientists. So that is something, I mean, you know, I would receive visitors from universities, and there might be some scientists amongst them, and they might be there to talk about the importance of medical research in our universities. Or there might be scientists from another organization that might be in the private sector and or government organization that would be, putting forward their arguments. But they weren't arguments that I would call science-driven, scientist-driven arguments. And that was one of the things I was trying to say before. We need to hear more from the scientists. However you organize, we need to hear more from the scientists representing what it is that you as scientists feel it is important for us in government to understand about your profession and about your common goals.
I think it's a pretty important question. I'm going to let anybody else who feels like they want to answer it. But also, if you do, please give us a hint about how scientists are best to approach politicians. What's the best way to say, hey, this is what I think you should be doing?
I'm going to take a crack at this. I meet a lot of health researchers that do come to my office, but not a lot of people from the basic sciences. And one of the things that I would strongly advocate, if any of you are here from universities, is we actually need to have courses about how government works, so that young people that are entering into undergraduate and then into postgraduate positions, who are filling out those absolutely ridiculous long forms, which I've done my own fair share of, but luckily also had a PhD usually helping me do them. But how this place works, it's very different. Similar to how we need to have some of the people that are elected here, a little different than this panel, on how does science work? And how did you become a PhD? Because I think if we have a better common understanding of how each other works, you'll accomplish some of your goals, but we'll also be better informed on what you need and how to drive forward an agenda that focuses on those people and ideas in order to make sure, whether it's building our economy or finding that next great discovery, we'll be able to accomplish that. So if you're an educator in a postgraduate education facility in the audience, I encourage you to do the how does government work for your basic science students, because that will allow them and give them the confidence to be able to come and talk to people here so that we can all work together.
Go ahead, Madame.
I think,
First Madame LeBlanc and then...
I think if I may add, it's a two-way street. I feel that it is my duty as a politician to go and seek the information also, and to invite people to come to my office, or if I can go even meet them where they are and learn more. It is my responsibility as a politician, newly elected politician, to go and seek the information when I am confronted with an issue that is quite important, to seek the information. And I think it's very important to do that. But also it is very important for the community to let us know what are the issues at stake, to raise alarms, to let us know if there are something that we should pay attention to. So I think it works both ways. And also to have a dialogue, to have a conversation. It cannot go only one way. It has to have a receiving end, an attentive ear. And I think what is one of the barriers, if we want to talk about barrier, is sometimes in the language. I have had the chance to study in the science of agriculture, environment, microbiology, biochemistry. But I must say at first it was a very difficult language for me to comprehend. And fortunately, after the study, I am able to read the paper and to understand a little bit more. But I must say for a lot of people that study in other type of field, the language is sometimes very difficult. So it needs to be kind of translated sometimes. I hope in my mandate I will be able to do that, to convey that message to my colleague, but also to the people I represent, and I think that would help in the long run.
Mr. Maridi.
Yes. Well, as you know, members of very many professionals, they always lobby politicians. We get calls in the meeting for meetings from various various professional groups, associations, unions, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to scientists and researchers, given the nature of science and the research and scientists, they are not the kind of people they get together and they lobby politicians. So that is, I think, one of the problems. So in order to solve that problem, it's really for us as politicians, we should go to scientists rather than scientists coming to us as politicians asking for funding. It is for us as government and politicians to go to scientists and see what are your needs. We have to prepare, we have to basically come up with what they need in order for them to have the peace of mind, to generate knowledge, to generate new ideas, to innovate. And as we all know, the future of the economy of this country, this nation, is dependent upon new ideas. We are not going to be able to compete with, with countries like China, India, and other countries where the labor is so cheap. We cannot compete with these economies in terms of just ordinary labor in manufacturing. The only area where we can compete with other nations, with emerging nations, is with our brain, with our innovation, with our research, with our new ideas, new products that we can develop. And that comes as a result of the work of scientists, as a result of researchers. So as a government, we should be going to scientists, to researchers, saying, what are your needs? And let them satisfy your needs so that you'll be able to create new knowledge, new ideas, new products with peace of mind. But that's not what we are doing. And now we see that many researchers in universities and other organizations, most of their time is basically taken by filling out very many application forms. They're always in the process of doing paperwork. And who is doing this? Very well experienced scientists doing this because other people can't. So these are some of the issues, some of the problems. In Germany, for example, they have created research institutions, and these research institutions they have funding, continuous funding, not program funding. They're continuous funding from the government. So all the time they're basically working on various areas of science, starting from fundamental research to commercialization of research and development. So it covers the whole range, but they are working on these areas with peace of mind. So government gives them the funding, and they generate always new ideas, new economy. It's not surprising to see that why German economy has been flourishing for decades and decades and decades in Europe. And they don't have, by the way, any military industry. Germany doesn't have military industry, or if they do, it's very minimal in comparison to their other industries. So they're always in the business of creating knowledge, creating new ideas and new technologies, and their governments are supporting them. And when you look at the German government structure, it's very close to ours. They also have a federal system of government, and we do have a federal system of government. But when it comes to science and science policy, I think we need to have a very coherent science policy headed by our federal government, cooperated with the provincial governments, and assisted by industry, various industry. And when it comes to priorities, I think every area of science should be our priority. We cannot box in scientists saying that you have to do research in this particular area. Let them be free and generate new ideas and the new knowledge.
Well, on that note, do politicians ever hear about what scientists are researching and roll their eyes and saying, why are we funding that? I mean, is it ever difficult for politicians to justify the fact that they're putting money toward the study of some minor species nobody's ever heard about, or something that whose public policy value is not quite so apparent? Does it become more difficult to justify funding those things? I guess I'll go with Dr. Leach to start this.
Well, I think that the one thing I would think most people in the room understand how the process works, which is that the people that are sitting in the House of Commons are not voting one by one on your research projects. Mind you, that would be mildly amusing, and I'd love to see it. I think Dr. Garneau and others of us would be doing a lot of education on the Hill at that point in time if we were doing that. You know, there are peer review processes, and there's a reason for that. It's because here in Canada, we have world-class research. We have certain standards that we want to adhere to so that the research that is generated out of this country is valuable and is appreciated internationally. And, you know, I'm delighted I sit in the riding of Simcoe Grey, where Sir Frederick Manting is from. My office at the University of Toronto was his office. We are very privileged in this country to have amazing researchers and scientists that do amazing things that impact people across the globe. And we are able to do that because we have a great system of peer-reviewed publications where great research moves forward through a peer-reviewed system. And so I'm delighted that we have that, and I think we'll be sticking to it, albeit that I would be very amused to see all of my colleagues voting on various research projects that came to light in the House of Commons. I'd like to know Dr. Garneau's comments on that.
Well, I would too. I would point out that various taxpayer groups, though, every year pull out lists of projects that are being funded that sound crazy just to, you know, paint the government in a bad light or to suggest that it's wasteful spending or whatever. Mr. Garneau?
Well, I think, Gloria, you're talking about something that is fundamental and one of the very important areas where science policy has to grapple with how it approaches research. The issue of whether certain science is more important than other science. And I think that it's a dangerous thing for not just a politician, but for anybody to pass that judgment when we're talking about science, because how are we wise enough to know whether certain science is more important than other science? But that is, you know, there's a variety of opinion on that within the political spectrum. So yes, there are that list that gets pulled out every year, and on the face of it looks like it may be questionable in terms of being financed. But as I say, we should not be guilty as politicians of the sin of hubris. We know, as Kelly pointed out, that there are peer reviews that go on, but you know, funding organizations are also driven by certain guidelines. And what are those guidelines? Sometimes they're handed down from the politicians. And so that's part of the guidance that they have in deciding whether they will fund certain projects versus other projects. I come up against this in the space world all the time. For example, if you look at our astronomers in this country, they really are a first-class bunch of scientists and really on a world scale, very, very high up there. Now, astronomers are not generally viewed as people who contribute to the discovery of commercial products. They contribute to the discovery of knowledge, and we're very proud of them. But compare them to, for example, somebody who does research on a material that might be used on a satellite, and that material turns out to have great spin-off value in terms of commercial use back here on Earth. There is a value judgment that is sometimes passed by politicians about which one is more important. And so those are things that we as politicians have to make decisions about in terms of deciding what science is more worthy of funding versus other science.
Sure.
And actually, it reminds me of the great responsibility that we have as scientists, not as scientists, excuse me, politician scientists, as politician, is that the decision that we make now, let's say in 2011, will have repercussion in the future. So we have to be very careful in the orientation we may be given, either towards the funding or the way we may favor one type of science or more commercially driven type of research, because it impacts even after we may not get elected or whatnot. So that's a great responsibility that we have to take into account, and therefore the communication is very important. And also to continue on what Mr. Garneau has mentioned is, as I was mentioning, a lot of the issue we are facing are multifaceted. Therefore, we need to rely on a lot of information coming from various fields. And in order to make informed decisions, we need to really listen to what's going on in all those different fields. And there are different types of research, and there's research that is ongoing, whether it's looking at the climate, whether it's looking at the different species in waters, in the biodiversity. It's long-term research, and that research may not be having a wow moment of discovery, but they are the story that we need to have in order to know the state of our environment, the state of the impact we have on that environment. And therefore, that type of research is also very important.
All right, for my final question, before we turn it over, to the floor, I'm going to put you all on the spot. And I'm going to put you on the spot because you have to answer this in a nonpartisan fashion, which is going to be really difficult.
This sounds really loaded.
Yeah, it is. Is it ever, and we've seen this from all governments, because there are times, frankly, when it is, and politically expedient is putting too hard an edge on it. Well, there are times, frankly, where governments have to say, look, it's more socially beneficial in this case to, if not ignore the science, put off the science. Have you ever been in that situation where you felt we can't listen to the scientists today, we're going to have to do what the taxpayers want rather than what is, the long, hard route that the scientists are telling us we should do? And I'll start with Mr. Morita.
No, I haven't come across this situation, but generally speaking, when you look at the history, politicians coming from political background or social background, they may not be able to see the importance of research and then the science in the future of the economy of a nation. I tell you a story which goes back to 110 years ago when James Clerk Maxwell came up with 4 mathematical formulas combining the science of electricity and science of magnetism, and also explaining the whole science of optics. Basically, by 4 mathematical formulas, he explained the whole science of electricity, magnetism, and optics. The story goes that the British Chancellor of Exchequer, or in our language, Minister of Finance of Britain, in an event asked him, he said, Professor Maxwell, what is the use of these 4 mathematical formulas? Who is going to use them? And he paused and he responded to him and he said, sir, if you are going to remain as Chancellor of Exchequer for the next 20 years, you will be taxing to the result of these 4 mathematical formulas. And today we know that all these developments in science and engineering comes mainly from those 4 mathematical formulas. But some politicians still, they may see things in a very short-sighted way because of politics, because of vote, because of your term in politics. But when it comes to science policy, I think all politicians should sit down, both federally and provincially, come up with a very long-term strategy. That's what we should be doing for this nation, for this country. We need a long-term, not a program, strategy, long-term continuous funding for our scientific institutions.
Dr. Leach, are there ever times when you feel that could you ever imagine a time when taxpayers' desires override science?
I've been fortunate enough not to be put in that circumstance. I don't think that there would be, and because I think that the majority of individuals that are elected, plus those individuals that are scientists, really, truly, when given the opportunity to collaborate and come up with a common solution that works for everyone, they'll achieve that goal. And so I guess my goal is to be one of those people that's a collaborator that reaches out to scientists, and I hope scientists feel very comfortable coming to speak to me when there's issues that arise where we have to make choices.
Mr. Garneau, do you think it ever happens has it ever come up in your world?
I think it's absolutely critical that as politicians we deal with scientific reality, with scientific fact. What we do with that reality is the business of making difficult decisions in politics, sometimes because the funding is not there, or sometimes because we may feel that other values, moral values, override the scientific evidence. Whatever we do, we should always understand the facts, the evidence, and then we make the decisions following that understanding. But we should always have a clear and crystal clear understanding. What we do after that is the hard part, and the one that we are accountable for as politicians. And I think all of us here would say we'd like to make that science pie as big as possible, but we can't. And we also have to hold you accountable, because when we do fund you, we are using the taxpayers' money. And so whilst we can't make the pie as big as possible, we can sometimes intelligently redistribute that pie in the most intelligent manner. But that involves making decisions. But all I'm saying is that the decision should be based on a clear understanding of the scientific evidence.
Madame LeBlanc, I know you're a new politician, so I'm going to put another question to you instead. I'm going to ask, what would you do to encourage more scientists to run for politics? And what could political parties do to encourage scientists to run for politics? And should, in fact, more scientists run for politics? What is the importance of having more scientists in politics?
Well, I think one of the steps is talking and meeting scientists and telling them how great it is, and also in school meeting students and getting them involved in the political process. A lot of young people are very interested are keen in learning, and they are in science, but also keen in wanting to change the world. And I think one of the way is getting involved in politics. And I think right now we are seeing that the people that get involved in politics are coming from a wide range of backgrounds. And I think it's very interesting that way, and it's making a very positive change. There's some, I think in the United States, they even have programs that encourage scientists to get involved in politics, and certain party even, I think, may help in the campaign. And I think it's also political party should seek out to have as candidate people from various backgrounds that will be able to speak various voice and bringing them to the political field.
Anybody else have a response for that one? What you do to get more scientists in politics? Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I think it's a very good question, at least for this audience. We need to encourage more scientists to enter into politics. When I was running and campaigning in my writing, some people came to me and, after looking at my candidate card and reading my little biography there, just a few sentences, a couple of people told me, they said, "Are you mad?" One said, "Are you crazy?" The other said, "Why are you doing this?" And one person said, "Go and find a job for yourself." But anyway, when I look around, I see that in other countries, scientists played a major role in politics. For example, in Israel, the first president of Israel, though Albert Einstein was asked to be the first president of Israel and he rejected, but Weizmann was a very prominent chemist in the UK. He was chosen as the first president of Israel. And then we have Jimmy Carter, the former president of the United States. He was a physicist. Actually, he worked at Chalk River Lab for some time. And then we have Margaret Thatcher, famous Prime Minister, the Iron Lady. She was a chemist. And then we have Angela Merkel, the current Chancellor of Germany. She's a physicist. And we had Javier Solana, former foreign commissioner of the European Union. He was also a physicist. We had Akayov, who was the president of Kyrgyzstan after the collapse of Soviet Union. He was also a physicist. So we have quite a number of scientists, in politics in other countries. But in Canada, we didn't have very many. I am the only physicist and scientist in the Ontario legislature. We have one engineer colleague, and we had another engineer colleague who didn't get elected this time. But we have only 2 or 3 people in the Ontario legislature. So we need really, as a country, as a nation, we need to come up with certain strategy to persuade our scientists to enter into politics. I don't know, I don't have the solution for that, but I think that there is quite a lot of need for that. The scientific community should do this, the political community should do that, political parties should approach scientists, attract them to politics. We have to do something. We cannot just let our political arena to be run by non-scientists. This is not good for our country.
Mr. Gono?
Just to be brutally honest, I think that many scientists are not particularly drawn towards politics. It requires a different set of skills and a different set of interests, and they are more drawn towards the exciting research that they are involved with. Scientists are also very Cartesian. That can get you into trouble in politics, I'll tell you that right now. It gets me into trouble. And yet, if there are some of you who have that interest, because you have strong opinions about the funding of SHRC programs or NSERC programs or CIHR programs, or you're at the NRC and you don't like the direction in which it's going, or any number of other issues where policy is ultimately affecting your life, then you are a potential candidate for it. Many scientists that I have met will be in their labs and they'll say, I don't like the way the indirect costs of research program is funded, or I don't like the way postgrads have such a difficult time trying to make ends meet. But so they're aware of issues, but they may not necessarily feel drawn to engaging in combat about it. And that's the kind of person that we need as a potential politician. So I think that the point that was made earlier, I'm not sure, perhaps it was Kelly who made it, about learning about how that place works over there is a very valuable thing, because it at least makes you understand how it is that the people over there formulate policy and perhaps how you might influence that. I think that's important. The second thing is language. Scientists are not always, excuse me for saying it, the best communicators. And that is extremely important as well, to communicate succinctly. And so that's part of the challenge as well. Having said that, there are some really good scientists, communicators, but that's another part of it that is very important if you're interested in politics.
Did you, well, were you anxious to answer that?
I'll make 2 comments very quickly. The succinctness on communications is important. When you have 35 seconds in question period, it's rather challenging sometimes as a scientist to get through that. Just 3 quick things. If you want to participate and you're a student here at the University of Ottawa or Carleton or at a lab, come to one of our offices, because we will educate you about the Hill. I think anyone here would be approachable to do that and allow you to understand better how the Hill works. Your country actually needs you to do this, or at least a handful of you in this room to do this, because we need your help to shape policy for this country going forward. We need your ideas and your opinions and how you think, which is different than all those other individuals that may be sitting in the House of Commons, to help shape the fabric of this country. So if there are a handful of you here, please come and meet with any of us, whatever your political affiliation is, because we love to have your input and involvement in the public policy development of this country.
I have to apologize. I thought this ran till 7:30, and I don't want to keep you all from a reception, and yet I don't want to spoil your chance of asking questions. I assume our panelists will be at the reception, will you? Or maybe, well, anyway, let me ask this. Is there anybody who has a quick question that you'd like to put to our panel? Seeing none, let's
Must be hungry.
go to the reception. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists.